Good morning, everyone. Today we are going for First Chapter Friday. We are going to be reading from The Maze Runner by James Dashner. So it is actually a series. There are three more books, and it is a movie now, but I hope that this kind of piques your interest in the book, The Maze Runner. We're just going to read the first two chapters. All right, here we go. Chapter 1. He began his new life standing up, surrounded by cold darkness and stale, dusty air. Metal ground against metal. A lurching shudder shook the floor beneath him. He fell down at the sudden movement and shuffled backward on his hands and feet, drops of sweat beating on his forehead, despite the cool air. His back struck a hard metal wall. He slid along it until he hit the corner of the room. Sinking to the floor, he pulled his legs up tight against his body, hoping his eyes would soon adjust to the darkness. With another jolt, the room jerked upward like an old lift in a mine shaft. Harsh sounds of chains and pulleys, like the workings of an ancient steel factory, echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls with a hollow, tinny whine. The lightless elevator swayed back and forth as it ascended, turning the boy's stomach sour with nausea. A smell like burnt oil invaded his senses, making him feel worse. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. He could only sit there, alone, waiting. My name is Thomas, he thought. That. That was the only thing he could remember about his life. He didn't understand how this could be possible. His mind functioned without flaw, trying to calculate his surroundings and predicament. Knowledge flooded his thoughts, facts and images, memories and details of the world and how it worked. He pictured snow on trees, running down a leaf-strewn road, eating a hamburger, the moon casting a pale glow on a grassy meadow, swimming in a lake, a busy city square with hundreds of people bustling about their business. And yet he didn't know where he came from, or how he'd gotten inside a dark lift, or who his parents were. He didn't even know his last name. Images of people flashed across his mind, but there was no recognition, their faces replaced with haunted smears of color. He couldn't think of one person he knew or recall a single conversation. The room continued its ascent, swaying. Thomas grew immune to the ceaseless rattling of the chains that pulled him upward. A long time passed. Minutes stretched into hours, although it was impossible to know for sure because every second seemed an eternity. No, he was smarter than that. Trusting his instincts, he knew he'd be moving for roughly half an hour. Strangely enough, he felt his fear whisked away like a swarm of gnats caught in the wind, replaced by an intense curiosity. He wanted to know where he was and what was happening. With a groan and then a clonk, the rising room halted. The sudden change jolted Thomas from his huddled position and threw him across the hard floor. As he scrambled to his feet, he felt the room sway less and less until it finally stilled. Everything fell silent. A minute passed. 2. He looked in every direction but saw only darkness. He felt along the walls again, searching for a way out, but there was nothing, only the cool metal. He groaned in frustration. His echo amplified through the air like the haunted moan of death. It faded and silence returned. He screamed, called for help, pounded on the walls with his fist. Nothing. Thomas backed into the corner once again, folded his arms and shivered, and the fear returned. He felt a worrying shudder in his chest, as if his heart wanted to escape to flee his body. "Someone, help me!" he screamed. Each word ripped his throat raw. A loud clank rang out above him, and he sucked in a startled breath as he looked up. A straight line of light appeared across the ceiling of the room, and Thomas watched as it expanded. A heavy, grating sound revealed double sliding doors being forced open. After so long in darkness, the light stabbed his eyes. He looked away, covering his face with both hands. He heard noises above, voices, and fear squeezed his chest. "Look at that shank. How old is he? Looks like a clunk in a t-shirt." "You're the clunk, shuck face. Dude, it smells like feet down there." "Hope you enjoyed the one-way trip, Greenie. Ain't no ticket back, bro." Thomas was hit with a wave of confusion, blistered with panic. The voices were odd, tinged with echoes. Some of the words were completely foreign. Others felt familiar. He willed his eyes to adjust to this as he squinted toward the light and those speaking. At first, he could only see shifting shadows, but they soon turned into shapes of bodies, people bending over the hole in the ceiling, looking down at him, pointing. And then, as if the lens of a camera had sharpened its focus, the faces cleared. They were boys, all of them. Some young, some older. Thomas didn't know what he'd expected, but seeing those faces puzzled him. They were just teenagers, kids. Some of his fear melted away, but not enough to calm his racing heart. Someone lowered a rope from above, the end of it tied into a big loop. Thomas hesitated, then stepped into it with his right foot and clutched the rope as he yanked toward the sky. Hands reached down, lots of hands, grabbing him by his clothes, pulling him up. The world seemed to spin, a swirling mist of faces and color and light. A storm of emotions wrenched his gut, twisted and pulled. He wanted to scream, cry, throw up. The chorus of voices had grown silent, but someone spoke as they yanked him over the sharp edge of the dark box, and Thomas knew he'd never forget the words. "Nice to meet you, Shank," the boy said. "Welcome to the glade." Chapter 2. The helping hands didn't stop swarming around until Thomas stood up straight and had the dust brushed from his shirt and pants. Still dazzled by the light, he staggered a bit. He was consumed with curiosity, but still felt too ill to look closely at his surroundings. His new companion said nothing as he swiveled his head around, trying to take it all in. As he rotated in a slow circle, the other kids snickered and stared. Some reached out and poked him with a finger. There had to be at least 50 of them, their clothes smudged and sweaty as if they'd worked hard, all shapes and sizes and races, their hair of varying lengths. Thomas suddenly felt dizzy, his eyes flickering between the boys and the bizarre place in which he'd found himself. They stood in a vast courtyard several times the size of a football field, surrounded by 4 enormous walls made of gray stone and covered in spots with thick ivy. The walls had to be hundreds of feet high and formed a perfect square around them, each side split in the exact middle by an opening as tall as the wall themselves. From what Thomas could see, led to passages and long corridors beyond. "Look at the green bean," a scratchy voice said. Thomas couldn't see who it came from. "Gonna break his shuck neck checking out the new digs." Several boys laughed. "Shut your hole, Gally," a deeper voice responded. Thomas focused back in on the dozen strangers around him. He knew he must look out of it, like he felt like he'd been drugged. A tall kid with blonde hair and a square jaw sniffed at him, his voice devoid of expression. A short, pudgy boy fidgeted back and forth on his feet, looking up at Thomas with wide eyes. A thick, heavily muscled Asian kid folded his arms as he studied Thomas. His tight shirt sleeves rolled up to show off his biceps. A dark-skinned boy frowned, the same one who'd welcomed him. Countless others stared. "Where am I?" Thomas asked, surprised at hearing his voice for the first time and his salvageable memory. It didn't sound quite right, higher than he would have imagined. "Nowhere good." This came from the dark-skinned boy. "Just slim yourself nice and calm." "Which keeper he gonna get?" Someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "I told you, Shuckface," a shrill voice responded. "He's a clunk, so he'll be a slopper, no doubt about it." The kid giggled like he'd just said the funniest thing in history. Thomas once again felt a pressing ache of confusion, hearing so many words and phrases that didn't make sense. Shank, shuck, keeper, slopper. They popped out of the boy's mouth so naturally it seemed odd for him to not understand. It was as if his memory loss had stolen a chunk of his language. It was disorienting. Different emotions battled for dominance in his mind and heart: confusion, curiosity, panic, fear. But laced through it all was the dark feeling of utter hopelessness, like the world had ended for him, had been wiped from his memory and replaced with something awful. He wanted to run and hide from these boys. The scratchy voiced boy was talking. "Even do that much. Bet my liver on it." Thomas still couldn't see his face. "I said shut your holes," the dark boy yelled. "Keep yapping next and I'll break your cut in half." That must be their leader, Thomas realized. Hating how everyone gawked at him, he concentrated on studying the place the boy had called the glade. The floor of the courtyard looked like it was made of huge stone blocks, many of them cracked and filled with long grasses and weeds. An odd, dilapidated wooden building near one of the corners of the square contrasted greatly with great stone. A few trees surrounded it, their roots like gnarled hands digging into the rock floor for food. Another corner of the compound held gardens. Where he was standing, Thomas recognized corn, tomato plants, fruit trees. Across the courtyard from there stood wooden pens holding sheep and pigs and cows. A large grove of trees filled the final corner, the closest ones looking crippled and close to dying. The sky overhead was cloudless and blue, but Thomas could see no sign of the sun despite the brightness of the day. The creeping shadows of the walls didn't reveal the time or direction. It could be early morning or late afternoon. As he breathed in deeply, trying to settle his nerves, a mixture of smells bombarded him: freshly turned dirt, manure, pine, something rotten, and something sweet. Somehow, he knew these were the smells of a farm. Thomas looked back at his captors, feeling awkward but desperate to ask the question. Captors, he thought. Why did that word pop into my head? He scanned their faces, taking in each expression, judging them. One boy's eyes, flared with hatred, stopped him cold. He looked so angry, Thomas wouldn't have been surprised if the kid came at him with a knife. He had black hair, and when they made eye contact, the boy shook his head and turned away, walking toward a greasy iron pole with a wooden bench next to it. A multicolored flag hung limply in the top of the pole, no wind to reveal its pattern. Shaken, Thomas stared at the boy's back until he turned and took a seat. Thomas quickly looked away. Suddenly, the leader of the group, perhaps he was 17, took a step forward. He wore normal clothes, black t-shirt, jeans, tennis shoes, a digital watch. For some reason, the clothing here surprised Thomas. It seemed like everyone should be wearing something more menacing, like prison garb. The dark-skinned boy had short cropped hair, his face clean-shaven, but other than the permanent scowl, there was nothing scary about him at all. All right, I'm going to stop there. Make sure that you fill out your First Chapter Friday log. It is posted on Google Classroom. Remember, that is a running document, so you do not need to turn it in till the end of the 9 weeks. Hope you enjoyed.